On Saturday, August 22nd, the German advance continued towards the south. The French soldiers of the 18th Corps tried to slow it down by occupying a position to the north of Sambre to defend the bridges and thus attempt to check the enemy's progress. There are 4 bridges in Lobbes. 2 are road bridges and 2 are rail. Mayor Duquesne received the order to leave the streetlights on the left bank switched on overnight so that the French could better observe the enemy approach. Rail traffic was interrupted since the 2 steel railway bridges had been barricaded with carts which had been tipped over on the tracks. At that time, the Cologne-Paris Express travelled via the Upper Sambre line, which crossed the river at several of the river's bends. Since the termination of local fighting, the Germans had been busy clearing the tracks, since they needed the railway to bring up their heavy artillery in order to open the siege of Maubeuge. By Sunday morning, the Germans were in place. Very quickly, the pressure on the French increased, and by mid-afternoon, the Germans were gathering on the right bank, forcing the French to fall back towards the Helleu plateau. Despite superior German numbers, the French army inflicted heavy losses on the enemy. In the evening, General Sordet's cavalry corps withdrew towards the south. Lobbes was set on fire, but the residents still hurried to help the wounded. On the following day, the men of the village were conscripted to temporarily burying the dead. During the occupation, the German authorities decided to set up a military cemetery in Lobbes for the soldiers of both countries who'd fallen in battle. All that remains today is the surrounding wall and the entrance gate to the cemetery. In Leernes, by midday on August the 22nd, and supported by heavy field artillery barrages, the Germans poured out of Goutrou and Monceau-sur-Sambre on the Espinette plateau. Fighting was short-lived, but violent. 2 civilians met their deaths there, one of whom was attempting to help the French soldiers of the 28th Infantry Regiment. At the request of the French, a temporary hospital was set up in the buildings of a former convent school. It had only 12 beds, and the first of the wounded arrived within 30 minutes of the start of the fighting. In need of more beds, straw, hay and eiderdown mattresses were brought into use. When fighting ceased, the most seriously wounded were sent to the hospital in Fontaine-l'Évêque. During the First World War, a high number of prisoners were taken. Over 6.5 million soldiers were captured, 2,250,000 by Germany. As enemy prisoners of war, French soldiers were required to perform heavy labor, and living conditions were very harsh. And while the majority of the prisoners were soldiers, civilians were also taken hostage to be held in Belgium or sent to Germany. In Leernes, as everywhere else, monuments were erected at the end of the war, evidence of the determination not to forget this war and its heroes. The Leernes Monument was inaugurated in 1921, supported by a public subscription started by Dr. Audin. It's dedicated to the memory of the French soldiers who died during the Leernes campaign.